who happens to be in town, and he just joined us for this conference. And so there is a small change in the program. Dalia Fahmy is going to introduce Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool, who will give the closing remarks in about 10 minutes. So, Professor Rasool.
So what a treat, no more me. Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool was a member of the anti-apartheid struggle. He was part of the negotiations of the transition from apartheid to democracy in South Africa. He was then elected in a majority non-Muslim province as governor, and then resigned the position after he opposed the corruption of Jacob Zuma. He was then appointed ambassador to the United States here in DC and served as a visiting scholar here at Georgetown. Ambassador Rasool founded the World Foundation that has taken him throughout most of the Arab Spring states and has given him a bird's eye view of what we've been talking about today. And he has most recently been appointed as chair of the Development Bank for South Africa. But most importantly, he's a mentor and a friend to most of us here in this room. So allow me to introduce you to and give a warm welcome to Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool.
Thank you very much, Dalia, for that warm introduction, and Radwan for his generosity in allowing me to come here. This is as much a surprise to you as it was to me. But I was looking at the comparative afternoon programs of the World Bank, IMF, and what was happening here in my old stomping ground at Georgetown University, this very building, and thought that this is really where the action is and that I should come and listen. I did not expect to come and speak, but in order to maintain some level of dignity in what was a very high-powered conference, I thought I should just prepare a few remarks. I want to say that what we've been hearing, particularly what I've been hearing in this afternoon, is a classical case of the Muslim world having a triple bypass from the West, and particularly from the United States. The bypass of democracy, of human rights, and of freedom. And it's manifested through the preponderance of authoritarianism, where Muslims are majorities, occupation, as we are experiencing in Palestine, and Islamophobia, where we are minorities. There's not an affliction that bypasses Muslims as much as the good things bypass us. And the issues which occupy my mind is how it happens in a country like the United States to allow that bypass when it prides itself on what it achieves within its own community, within its own country and within its own borders, and within the fraternity of whites. How this is engineered has to be that the other must be subhuman, must be a stereotype, must be a caricature of life. And I say that because that's the feeling we had growing up in apartheid South Africa, that you could have a Thatcher and a Reagan who could allow for the kind of atrocities that apartheid visited upon its black population. And I was reminded of this condition that the brown and the black peoples of the world lived through when during the COVID period there were no lectures for my son who was studying at Stellenbosch University, and I had to be the surrogate teacher, and with his literature course that he was doing, I was basically helping him. And then he did this very interesting thing that I did an entire module on in my studies at UCT, at the University of Cape Town, of Shakespearean tragedy. And he reminded me, because I took him through his study of Shakespeare's The Tempest. And in looking at this play by Shakespeare, The Tempest, there is this character, Prospero, who is supposedly a civilized man of letters, so disinterested in the world that he is deposed from the throne of Naples and exiled to a supposedly uninhabited island. Except it wasn't uninhabited. It was inhabited by those who were deemed the unlettered, the uncivilized, and very interestingly, the masterless people. People who were not mastered, who were wild, who were savage, and who were rebellious, and who must learn to subject their libidos to discipline, their bodies to their soul, and their passion to reason. And out of that is constructed an entire typology that subhumanizes. Because if you dehumanize and you subhumanize someone, you have the right to become their masters because they are masterless. And the other in The Tempest is personified by Caliban, who flirts with Prospero's daughter and is punished for it. But the riposte of Miranda to Caliban becomes almost an idea of the DNA that is within the colonial masters as they view the other who they subject. Miranda says, and I quote, "Abhorred slave, which any print of goodness will not take. When thou did not, savage, know your own meaning, we gave you meaning. But your vile race had that in it which good natures could not abide to be with. Therefore was thou deservedly confined to this rock." This is Shakespeare, writing this play in the late 1500s and first performed in 1611, just about the time when the voyages of discovery were reaching the southern shores of Africa and colonizing us. This is Shakespeare. Therefore, out of that contention by Shakespeare, the other must be contained and confined. And it's not a colonial thing. It's one that persists. We need the surveillance of this other, this Muslim other in this case. Either we must bend the imams to show us suspicious characters in the mosques in America, or we must create the surveillance state where the other exists. And then this idea applied to Shakespeare's The Tempest of the metamorphosized wild man, the one who is of us but is metamorphosized to play the role for surveillance and control and discipline, the authoritarians. Either it's authoritarians which are homegrown, or an authoritarian surveillance gendarme that is placed in the region. Because Prospero declares we need this control and surveillance and heavy-handed masterliness over us. Because, he says of the other, a born devil on whose nurture can never stick. Unquote. That's Shakespeare, giving us the formula for how we are viewed from the capitals of the West and giving us the very essence of the free pass for us to be done with what is needed, whether it is in black Africa or brown Middle East. So, my life in South Africa was all about defying and defeating such colonial precepts, because we soon realized that we were not going to get the benefit of the doubt, even if the atrocities against us were so evident, because there is an inner reading, an inner lens that flips that atrocity over and over through rationalization, through our dehumanization, that allows the atrocity to happen and not affect the souls of those who either do it or permit it. And we understood that our freedom comes when there is no longer an overarching purpose for us to be unfree, to let up the surveillance of us, to ease the control over us. And so our transition in South Africa from apartheid to democracy happened within the global transition of a bipolar world to a unipolar world when the Berlin Wall fell. It is no accident that the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and that Nelson Mandela was freed in 1990. Because the threat of the wild savage was diminished because Africa was no longer the theater of the Cold War. And so, foreign policy is often, I liken it to a telescope. It has two lenses, the lens of your values and the lens of your interests. And it often depends which lens you hold against your eye that will determine the outcome of foreign policy. Very famously, early in his presidency, Nelson Mandela held the lens of values firmly to his eyes to look at Nigeria, Sani Abacha, who had just the intention to execute Ken Saro-Wiwa. And he told, against the advice of other advisors in the ANC, to not take on Nigeria because Nigeria is too powerful. Nelson Mandela said, if I can't look at our interest through my values, then who am I and what did we struggle for? What the United States does is to invert that telescope and to calibrate its values through its interests. If its interest is oil and Israel, it will subvert its values that it lauds in the United States. It will subvert its values and it will allow counter-revolutions of the hard kind like in Egypt or the soft kind like in Tunisia. And so that foreign policy with the inverted telescope is fully at play as we stand now, but not as impervious as it was then. Because we had seen, and I understood it when I was in Saudi Arabia on Hajj last year, and I was sent with a mission by our country to look at how to manage this very messy situation of Hajj and Umrah for South African Muslims, where the demand exceeds the supply. And I understood out of that this preponderance of this idea of Vision 2030, that in the Middle East there is this race to manage a post-oil economy. that Hajj and Umrah needed to become service industries rather than religious obligations. That if they can build triple-story tent cities on Mina to triple the number of people to offset what in 70 years may be the end of oil, then they will do it. If they can get the technology supplied, then they become dependent, not on those who buy oil anymore, but those who supply the wherewithal for the post-oil economy. And if that involves being frog-marched to normalization, they will do that because their long-term interests are absolutely critical for them. And what we need to recalibrate is how those interests, not just the fact of a corrupt bunch of rulers, that may be the case, but it's also about understanding what drives this issue of normalization. And when we met about 6 weeks prior to October 7th, when we met outside Pretoria with a delegation of Palestinian leaders, including some who were recognized as Hamas leaders, within that, and we did this balance of forces and we did this strategic interventions that needed to, we understood normalization as the existential threat to Palestinian liberation and the Palestinian struggle itself, where even those who appeared and visibly speak the language are also in the queue for normalization. And so that, to a large extent, was the Hail Mary that was thrown on the 7th of October. And if you look back, it succeeded. It is now no longer de rigueur to be speaking about normalization, and it has been pushed back. But it came at the cost of almost 40,000 lives. It was into that South Africa, in our analysis, understood that we were dealing with 3 massacres in Palestine. There's the genocide, the killing of a genealogy that goes back to kill all heritage of a land once being Palestinian, and the killing of a future. 10,000 babies is not an accident. It is a genocidal intent to kill a future. The second massacre is a patricide. Not a patricide, that's the killing of your fathers. A patricide, the killing of a state. The original state of Palestine was subjected to that patricide 75 years ago. Now, the two-state solution is the victim de facto of a patricide. The facts of the ground have made the two-state solution a murdered solution. Today in Congress, they seem to have outlawed the idea of from the river to the sea. The fact of the matter is, we've got to change our language to say, from the river to the sea, there will be a democracy. Non-religious, one person, one vote, side-by-side living of all those who inhabit that entire land from the river to the sea. And change the calculus. Not be thrown a sop. Oh, we'll revive the two-state solution. The facts of the ground have murdered it. And the third massacre is what I call a vericide, the killing of the truth. And it was those 3 massacres that South Africa set out to stop when it went to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, and took Israel to that court. It wasn't a stunt, because the potential costs, if 211 Congress members in the United States get their way, the costs will be that South Africa will be severely punished by being kicked out of the African Growth and Opportunities Act, something that brings us revenue to the tune of $21 billion annually. But the Palestinians gave South Africa a gift that is greater than the gift of the ICJ that South Africa did. At the moment when we were at our most vulnerable to corruption and fratricide inside the country, the Palestinians again gave South Africa a sense of its true north, its moral center, and its moral purpose in the world. So we did not win the ceasefire. We did not stop the killings. We did not end the support for Israel, but we did change the narrative. We changed the narrative firstly, that the conflict did not start on the 7th of October, it started 75 years ago with an occupation. We changed the narrative of Israel as the victim of history to Israel as the perpetrator of a genocide. We changed the narrative of Israel as engaged in self-defense to Israel as engaged in a vengeful, brutish repression of the Palestinians. We changed the narrative from the Palestinians as the subhuman, terrorizing other to Palestinians as people. And we must never squander that. And I'll end now as you stand up. By asking the question, is there reason for optimism in this moment of darkness? I think so. If faith is that which you have not yet seen, then I think there is a clear division at this moment that we must not let, and unfortunately the Iranians don't ask for strategic advice, but they are the only ones who could shift the narrative at this moment back to what it was. And we've got to guard against it and have clear voices that assert outside of this Iranian thing the truth again. But we see the divide between the palace and the street. Whether the palace is the White House and the street are the streets of the United States, whether the palace is in the Middle Eastern capitals or the streets reacting to the plight of the Palestinians, we have been able to do that, and that is an encouraging sign. The other one, most importantly, is that all of this happens, and South Africa is a collateral player in all of this. All of this happens as a new multipolar world struggles to be born. The United States has squandered its unipolar leadership of the world since 1989 by taking us from one adventure into the other. Iraq 1, Iraq 2, Iraq 3, Afghanistan 1, 2, 3. All of those things, they've squandered their leadership that history gave them in 1989. And so the world is yielding to the birth because the United States confused unipolarity with unilateralism. What we are seeing is the birth of this multipolar world, imperfect as it is. It has some rogue elements, but at this moment, the world does not need a perfect Russia, a perfect China. What it just needs is a counterbalance, so that unilateralism can be pushed back. And that, for me, is the greatest cause of optimism that we have today, that we do and we are building the counterbalance to a unilateral power that says we're getting leadership back, but is incapable of leading itself even. It has no right to lead the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Rasool. You know very well that we could listen to you for hours, but unfortunately we have to leave the room in a few minutes because there is another event that starts basically at 5 o'clock. I want to conclude by another appeal for optimism. You know, we have been doing this at CSID for 25 years, so we did it long before the Arab Spring. And we were meeting with people here in Washington before the Arab Spring, and they were all saying that, the Arab order is here to stay, that these dictators are stable regimes. And we were telling them, no, this stability is fake. It's not real stability. I was saying this 6 months before the Arab Spring started. I said here in one of the meetings, I said, look, Mubarak is not popular. This regime is not stable. Oh, what are you talking about? He's stable. This regime is very stable in Egypt. 6 months later, he was gone. I could not have predicted it, but I knew that the regime was not stable and that it could go at any moment. I was in Tunisia on December 17th, 2010, when the Arab Spring started in December 17th, 2010, I was in Tunisia when Bouazizi, burned himself, to death. I did not even hear about it. I was in Tunisia. I did not even hear about it on that day. But at that time, people thought Ben Ali was stable. Everybody loved Ben Ali. In the streets of Tunisia, nobody was criticizing Ben Ali. I could not have predicted that 3 weeks later, less than 4 weeks later, Ben Ali was gone. Less than 4 weeks later, on January 14th, he was gone. So my prediction is there is another wave of Arab Spring coming, and it's coming very soon. And these regimes are very unstable. And they are even made more unstable now because of their silence towards what's happening in Gaza. And the Arab street is boiling. And we're going to see another wave of Arab Spring coming very soon. I cannot predict when, but it's very soon. Our task is to get ready. Our task is to make sure that this next wave will be better managed and better handled and will lead to a more stable and successful democracies in the Arab world. That's our challenge. But these regimes are not stable. And this situation cannot continue like this because people are fed up. That's my prediction. And also my source of optimism. Don't think that it can continue like this for very long. Finally, I want to thank all of you for coming to this conference. It's been a wonderful day. We've had a tremendous, excellent presentation and tremendous discussions. I hope it will energize us to continue the fight for freedom and for democracy and not to give up, not to lose hope. And also I want to thank the volunteers. We had 3 or 4 volunteers who did excellent work. Muhammad Ali Azayez is one of them, and Yusra Wadirni and Zakaria Masmoudi were outside taking care of the registration. I want to thank the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding at Georgetown for co-hosting this event, and also their staff for helping us with a lot of the logistics. And finally, our co-sponsors for covering some of the bills of this conference. It has been live streamed, so we have a lot of people who have seen it live streamed, but also recorded, and we will send those videos to a lot of people who are not able to join us. So again, thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you soon.